Hello and welcome back to History Tweaks for another alternate history scenario. This time, we look at the region of Bengal again, albeit in a different era. The region of Bengal has always been the crown jewel of many Indian empires, starting with the Mauryan Empire, the Gupta Empire, the Delhi Sultanates, the Mughal Empire, and even the British Empire, who gained their foothold in India by conquering Bengal. Bengal has always been a rich and fertile area with ample agricultural production as well as access to natural resources. The region and its surrounding areas also have been the centers of production of commodities like silk, jute, and indigo. Bengal also has an extensive coastline and a delta network which forms ample natural harbors, and its location with maritime connections to the Southeast Asian and Chinese regions as well as connection to the Silk Route had made it a hub of trade in the medieval as well as the ancient times. But ironically, the often forgotten Pala Empire was the last indigenous empire to rule the lands of Bengal. They were the last sons of soils, after which Bengal has been ruled by many: the Turks, the Mughals, the Afghans, the British. But after the collapse of the Pala Empire, from the late 12th century to 1947, there were no indigenous rulers in the lands of Bengal. And under the Pala Empire, Bengal saw one of its golden ages, where trade and productivity were at its peak. The Palas were also a tolerant ruling class. Even though they were Buddhists, they never persecuted Hinduism, and they patronized both Hindu and Buddhist monasteries and temples. Under the Palas, the caste system was also not very strong. The social order was open and there were multiple religious discourses between the Hindus and the Buddhists, and this is a period where Hinduism also saw a lot of reforms happen. After the fall of the Pala Empire, Bengal was captured by the Sena dynasty, originally from the Andhra region. The Sena rulers imposed a harsh Brahminical social order on Bengal based on the Manusmriti. They strengthened the caste system and persecuted the Buddhists, and hence the golden age of Bengal came to an end. Additionally, I also feel that calling Palas a regional power centered only around Bengal is a falsehood, because the Palas were one of the three main contenders in the Indian subcontinent during their time. Their influence spread at a time all over North India. Which just begs the question, what would have happened if the domains of the Palas actually stretched all over northern India or even further? After all, they were engaged in the tripartite struggle between the Palas, Pratiharas and the Rashtrakutas. What if they had won there? But what is the tripartite struggle, you ask? Well, let's see what happened in our timeline before dissecting the scenario. After the death of King Yashovarman, who succeeded Harshvardhan, the once powerful kingdom of Kannauj started to be weakened, while all around Kannauj, new powers were on the rise. In 750 CE, Gopala was elected by the feudal chieftains of Banga as their ruler, ending the 100-year anarchy or Matsya that prevailed in Bengal. And Gopala had managed to stabilize the Pala kingdom, and with the accession of his son Dharmapala to the throne, the Pala strength was on the rise. In the west, the Gujara Pratiharas had declared themselves independent from the Chavda kingdom and expanded in the regions of Malwa, Gwalior and Gujarat. After successfully resisting and halting the Abbasid expansion east from Sindh, they had their eyes set in strengthening their position in North India. And with the accession of Vatsaraja to the throne, the Pratihara ambitions flourished. Towards the south, in 757 CE, the Rashtrakutas of Manyakheta established their control in the Chalukya kingdom. They consolidated their realms, and by the 770s, their domain stretched from Kaveri to the Narmada, and the realms were held securely under the leadership of King Dharavarsha. On the other hand, with the death of the last Varman king of Kannauj, Bhoja, a succession struggle began among the members of the Ayudha family, and Kannauj was open for taking. The control of Kannauj ensured control of the central Gangetic Valley because before Delhi, Kannauj was the heart of the area. It was also connected to the Silk Road, making it a trade hub. Hence, all the three rising kingdoms had their eyes on it. The first move was made by King Vatsaraja in 784, who marched to Kannauj and defeated the king Indrayudha and established his overlordship over Kannauj. To challenge this, Dharmapala amassed an army and marched in 785 CE. They clashed at Prayag and the Palas were defeated. On the other hand, King Dharavarsha of the Rashtrakutas marched north, and as the Pratiharas were busy engaging the Palas, he was able to capture Malwa and then Kannauj, forcing the Pratiharas to flee and accept their victory. By 786 CE, Dharmapala regrouped and marched to Kannauj, but was defeated again by the Rashtrakutas. But King Dharavarsha died in 793 CE, ending his reign and causing civil unrest in his kingdom. With both the Pratiharas and the Rashtrakutas weakened, Dharmapala utilized the vacuum and captured and vassalized Kannauj. But by 795 CE, Vatsaraja's successor Nagabhatta II amassed an army and attacked Kannauj. He defeated Chandrayuddha, Dharmapala's protege, and then, in a pitched battle near Munger, Dharmapala was defeated. Again, like a repeat of history, Dharavarsha's son, Govinda III, marched north and took Kannauj, and was forced to return to Deccan in 1802. Hence, Dharmapala swept in again and captured Kannauj. At Kannauj, Dharmapala held a darbar where supposedly kings of all of North India pledged fealty to him. However, this is definitely an exaggeration. Realistically, his influence may have extended to the Matsya and Kuru kingdoms next door. But with the death of Dharmapala in 1812, the empire was weakened and the Pratiharas managed to establish tighter control over Kannauj. But with the accession of Devapala, the Pala kingdom was consolidated and conquered Kamrupa by 835 CE and established control over Kannauj after defeating Nagabhatta II. However, with Devapala's death, his successors couldn't maintain the empire and lost Kannauj and Kamrupa by 850 CE. Under successively weak kings, Palas lost control over the Bengal Delta and then were attacked by the Cholas, who plundered the region around 1046. The Palas briefly gained control over all of Bengal before being overthrown by the Sena dynasty in 1175 CE. Under the Palas, Bengal had become extremely wealthy and had an extensive trading network from the Malay Peninsula and Indochina to the regions of the Arab world. Under the Palas, Bengal saw a golden age, but the Sena dynasty put an end to this age. They imposed strict Brahminical rules based on the Manusmriti and made caste barriers rigid and outcasted the untouchables. They also brought in the idea that if one travelled overseas, one would lose one's caste. This resulted in Bengal becoming a closed-off anti-trade agricultural society, and without the revenue from the trade, the Senas were never as strong as the Palas, and were easily defeated by the invading Delhi Sultanate in 1230 CE, ending self-rule in Bengal, which wouldn't see a social renaissance until the Bhakti movement and a revival of prosperity until the rise of the Bengal Sultanate. On the other hand, the constant struggle also weakened the Gujara Pratiharas, who lost their holdings in Malwa and were limited to the Kannauj region by 955 CE. This left a power vacuum in northwestern India, allowing Muslim rule to be established in Sindh, Multan and Kashmir. They ultimately fell when Mahmud of Ghazni attacked, and another power did not rise in northwestern India until the Rajputs in 1420 CE. After the reign of Govinda III, the Rashtrakutas never ventured north again, and by 971, following civil unrest, the dynasty was ousted and the Chalukyas took power. But with the rise of Cholas in South India, the Chalukyas were weakened and their empire too disintegrated by 1170, leaving an immense power vacuum in the Gangetic Plains, which facilitated the attack by Muhammad Ghori and establishment of the Delhi Sultanate. The Cholas retained their power in the southern India till 1260s and then fell. After the fall of Cholas, there was no other South Indian power until the Vijayanagar Empire in 1348 CE. But what if all that changed? What if the Palas emerged decisively victorious in the tripartite struggle and the three empires didn't wear each other out? For this, we'll have to make the Palas win decisively and not due to a power vacuum. So let's go back to 785 CE. Dharmapala is defeated at Prayag and then again by the Rashtrakutas. With two consecutive defeats and Kannauj being lost, Dharmapala begins to reform his armed forces and administration. He restructures the mandalas and the village entities in order to improve taxation and enhance supplies to the army. He further expands his elephant corps and improves the coordination between infantry and elephants. By 793 CE, the Rashtrakutas are forced to retreat and Dharmapala takes Kannauj and places Chakrayuddha on the throne. In 795 CE, the Pratiharas attack and defeat Chakrayuddha at Kannauj, but in this timeline, the Pala army is strengthened. There is a pitched battle between the two armies at Munger, and both sides suffer heavy casualty. The Pratihara army is shattered and they are forced to retreat to Ayodhya. With his reformed administration, Dharmapala is able to secure another force and reinforce the armies that were left. He then attacks and defeats Nagabhatta, who is forced to retreat to Ujjain. Hence, Kannauj is brought under Pala control. But then, in 796 CE, Govinda III marches north, And because Kannauj is taken very recently by the Palas, we can assume that Govinda still thinks that Pratiharas hold Kannauj. And because the route through Malwa is anyways the easiest, we can say that he attacks Malwa. In Malwa, Govinda III encounters the Pratihara army. Though depleted greatly, they hold Govinda and Malwa for some time, giving Dharmapala an opportunity to strengthen his army and bring in fresh reinforcements and to build the defences around Kannauj. By late 796 CE, Govinda marches on Kannauj but is halted by the force of Dharmapala. Another pitched battle takes place, and even though the Pala army suffers heavy losses against the Rashtrakutas, the army of Govinda is devastated, such that controlling Kannauj becomes impossible, and Govinda is forced to retreat. With this, Dharmapala establishes control over Kannauj in 797 CE. Due to the fact that Kannauj was overthrown by the Pratiharas due to its distance from the Pala heartland, Dharmapala decides to extend Pala domains to Ayodhya and Prayag and establishes a fort at Ayodhya. He then holds a darbar at Kannauj where the minor kings of the north, Matsya and Kuru, offer fealty and accept Pala overlordship. With the Gujarat Pratiharas being defeated 2 times in a row now, their power is seriously diminished. Losing Malwa, they are forced to look inwards, while the Rashtrakutas are also engulfed in civil turmoil brought on by their defeat. In 812 CE, Dharmapala dies, and the political uncertainty causes the empire to lose influence over Matsya and Kuru. But unlike in our timeline, the Pratiharas do not march instantly on Kannauj because they are busy retaking Malwa, which is considered as their core domain. In the meantime, Dharmapala's successor Devapala consolidates his power in Bengal. Unlike in our timeline, he does not march on Kamrup because in our timeline the Palas had already lost Kannauj and Devapala needed to strengthen the kingdom. But with Kannauj being retained, he bolsters the Pala defences over the region. Hence, when they do attack in 819 CE, the Pratiharas are defeated near Ayodhya and are forced to retreat. Now being defeated thrice by the Palas, Nagabhatta loses his credibility and multiple revolts break out. By 825 CE, the Malwa Parmaras secede and the Chavda vassals in Gujarat declare themselves independent. Nagabhatta is forced to turn focus inwards and towards the encroaching Arab Caliphate. He manages to regain Gujarat but Malwa resists. In 832 CE, Nagabhatta dies and is succeeded by Ramabhadra, who is an inept administrator, and he rules Gujarat again, and Malwa is seized by the Palas. In 834 CE, Devapala conducts a darbar and forces the kings of Matsya and Kuru to pledge fealty. He then attacks and subjugates the Kamrup kingdom, and in 836 CE, Devapala attacks coastal Utkal regions and conquers them. With his realms consolidated, Devapala turns to improve trade connections of the empire. He first strengthens trade in Malacca and then with Ceylon and the Cheras, and further with China. He further establishes trade connections with the Islamic world, also establishing a land route through Kannauj and Multan. In 842 CE, when the local rulers of Multan, instigated by the Gujarat Pratiharas, threaten the trade route, Devapala launches an expedition northwest and Multan is conquered. In 850 CE, Devapala passes away and is succeeded by his son Mahendrapala. During the turmoil after Devapala's death, the Palas lose parts of Malwa, Multan and Matsya. Pratiharas capture parts of Malwa and Multan. But with Mahendrapala consolidating his power, they are not able to recapture Kannauj. But eventually, the Palas are able to re-establish their control over the Multan area and further project their influence south to the Utkal coast. In 855 CE, Mahendrapala launches attacks into the Arakan region to protect trade from Malacca. The trade with Arabs is also re-established through Multan, and Mahendrapala establishes and strengthens the trade of silk from Kamrup via the Silk Road connections at Kannauj as well as through Multan. Under Devapala and Mahendrapala's reigns, the universities at Nalanda and Vikramashila are expanded. A monastery at Uddandapura is established and the monastery of Nalanda is expanded. Further, a university was established at Ujjain under Devapala, but when the Palas lost Ujjain to the Hindu Gujarat Pratiharas, the Buddhist monks would have had to flee from the city. Under the reign of Mahendrapala and Devapala, Buddhism flourished throughout North India. The temples at Bodh Gaya and Sanchi were re-established and renovated. The fleeing monks from Ujjain established a university at Sanchi as well. On the other hand, Hindu temples and monastic orders are also patronized. Under the reign of Devapala and Mahendrapala, multiple temples are built, and both the rulers follow a general policy of social, educational, intellectual, and religious tolerance. There are multiple religious discourses between Buddhism and Hinduism sees a period of reform. The Hindus from the North Indian regions, which were under Hindu rule, now experience a different kind of open society, which helps them to flourish. Caste barriers are weakened, and productivity and trade is increased. During this time, Mahendrapala also establishes greater control over Kannauj, Tripuri regions, and parts of Malwa that remained under Pala domains after reconquest by the Gujara Pratiharas. During this time, Proto or early Bengali language also starts becoming popular. It develops along with Sanskrit as the language of administration, as many officials responsible for administering the various regions are drawn from the Bengali region. With this, the language and the Buddhist Bengali culture is spread further into North India. Mantrayana Buddhism is also born through contact between Hinduism and Buddhism and discourse between them. Maritime as well as land trade flourishes. The connections between India and the Silk Route are strengthened, and Multan becomes the center of trade, being located at the junction between the Indian and the Arab worlds. The region of northern Gangetic Plains sees a golden age under the rule of these two kings. But the golden age ends with the death of Mahendrapala in 860 CE. The empire is weakened and his successor Shurapala is not able to maintain. The Palas lose Kamrup, Malwa, Matsya, Kuru, and Multan. The Pratiharas are strengthened, and the Pala Empire goes into the decline. In the 54-year reign of Narayanapala, the empire goes on the path of slow, steady decay. Mihra Bhoja of the Pratiharas captures Kuru and Matsya and directly threatens Kannauj. The Palas also lose Utkal and parts of East Bengal in the Delta region. But with the death of Mihra Bhoja and his son in quick succession, the Gujara Pratihara Empire starts to go into decline. Malwa and Gujarat regions secede, but Narayanapala is unable to capitulate on these power vacuums. However, he is able to strengthen his position at Kannauj and narrowly manages to retreat. In 920 CE, the Rashtrakutas attack under Amogha Varsha II and take Tripuri. But they are repelled from taking Kannauj because of the bolstered forces in the region. By 935 CE, the Pratiharas lose Rajasthan and are confined to the Matsya and Malwa regions. But Palas are unable to retake these lands. By 975, the Rashtrakutas were ousted by the Chalukyas and they lost Malwa, coastal Maharashtra, Tripuri, and Grahamandala regions. The power vacuum created in northwestern India allows for expansion and encroachment into Sindh and consolidation of power by the Arab Caliphate. With the three major empires weakened, there is a very high chance of an Islamic takeover of northern India. In 982 CE, Manipala comes to the throne of the Pala Empire, and with his reign, the resurgence of Pala power begins. He first consolidates his hold over all of Bengal and crushes the rebelling Chandelas in the Kannauj region. In 984 CE, Mahipala launches an expedition into Kamrupa, and by 986 CE, he conquers the region. He then captures Utkal and the regions of Deltaic Bengal. And with this, he is able to reopen maritime trade and re-establish the trade of Kamrupan silk like his great-grandfather. With the funds from the trade flowing into the Pala Empire, the empire is able to strengthen its military and launches an expedition to capture Tripuri and Mandala regions. Tripuri and Mandala are annexed by 987 CE. By 989 CE, the Malwa regions are recaptured and Ujjaini is consolidated. Mahipala, in the meantime, restructures the empire's territories according to the principles of Devapala and Mahendrapala and reopens the patronages given to the universities and educational institutions. With the increased literacy and intellectual manpower, Mahipala is able to efficiently restructure his administration, and he assimilates the regions of the kingdom of Kannauj, Tripuri and Grahamandala into the core of his empire. With Ujjain brought firmly under Pala control, another university is also established at Ujjain, and the monasteries previously deserted are renovated and re-established. By 992 CE, the Palas captured the regions of Rajasthan and northern Gujarat, and in 993 CE, Mahipala launches an expedition to subjugate the Gujara Pratihara holdings. By 998 CE, the Gujaras submit and the regions of northern India comes firmly under the control of Palas once again. On the other hand, with the establishment of Pala power in Rajasthan, the encroachments by the Islamic powers is halted. Soon the caliphate also falls, giving rise to multiple independent Islamic kingdoms like Sindh, Kashmir and Balochistan in the region. In the Afghan and Central Asian regions, the kingdom of Ghazni is also established and starts consolidating its power. In India, Using the learned professionals from the various universities, Mahipala starts restructuring the administration of the newly conquered territories of the empire. By this time, the early Bengali language also becomes popular and is made co-official, and becomes a sort of prestige language of the ruling classes, just like French was in medieval Europe. By the 11th century, the newly conquered regions are brought firmly under the control of the empire. Over in the south, the Cholas grow as a new power. In 1012 CE, Rajaraja Chola I starts marching northwards and attacks the Pala holdings in Utkal. The Palas are initially defeated but are able to defend and defeat the Cholas near Mednipur in Bengal. The Cholas are forced to retreat and Utkal is retaken, while the eastern kings of Chalukya are made a buffer state between the two powers. During this time, the trade and prosperity of the Pala Empire also flourishes because their main trade rival, the Cholas, are defeated. Universities are also established at Prayagraj and in Rajasthan. Mahipala also establishes new settlements and towns, builds tanks, irrigation channels, and lakes, just as in our timeline. He also renovates and builds temples and patronizes Hinduism as well. He also commissions other civil works, and under his reign, art and poetry is patronized, both in Sanskrit as well as in Old Bangla. He also encourages discussions and discourse on theology between Buddhists and Hindus, and this increased interaction causes many reform movements to form in both religions. Mantrayana Buddhism also starts gaining increased popularity during this period. With the increased trade and contact with the Islamic powers, Islamic philosophies and idea of astronomy start being studied in the empire. Scholars from Baghdad and beyond are invited to the court of the king and share their knowledge and gain knowledge from the Indians in universities like Nalanda, Vikramashila, Prayagraj, Ujjain, etc. Nayapala succeeds Mahipala in 1040 CE. The biggest threat he faces is the Ghaznavid Empire in the northwestern border. To defend effectively against them, Nayapala strengthens defenses in Multan and integrates Matsya regions. He also modernizes and expands the army and expands the border guard. Another challenge is the hindrance in trade caused by the Ghaznavid Empire between India and the Arab world, which used to pass through Multan, but now, due to the Ghaznavid Empire, is blocked, and hence, around 1045 CE, Nayapala launches an expedition into Gujarat and subjugates it to establish a trade route through the sea to the Arab world. It is around this time Nayapala is given the title the Master of North India, previously held by Mahendrapal. In commemoration of this, Nayapala commissions a Mahakavya to be written about the Pala kings of old, namely Dharmapala, Devapala and Mahendrapala. Through this process of study of the chronicles, Nayapala realizes the frailty of his empire. Some of his advisors help him realize how the Pala Empire fell earlier because of incapacity of his successive rulers. Realizing this, Nayapala takes inspiration from the start of the Pala dynasty to restructure the system of his empire. First, he consolidates the feudatory system of empire and all regions are given their heads or Ranakas. In 1048 CE, he decrees that the Ranakas are the ones who will elect the king from within the Pala family, drawing from the inspiration of how their first ruler of the Pala Empire, Gopala, was elected. This system is soon put to test when Nayapala dies in 1052 CE. Unlike in our timeline, where we saw a series of inept rulers take charge after Nayapala, the Pala Empire retains a series of good administrators. In the successive decades, the empire expands into Sindh in order to defend against the Ghaznavid Empire and successfully keeps them at bay. Further influence is extended into the Kingdom of Nepal and cultural influence over Tibet. The cultural influence in Tibet is due to the shared faith of Mantrayana Buddhism. Around this time, through contact with the Arabs, concept of cavalry and cannon are introduced to India and slowly adopted by the Palas. With the weakening of the Ghaznavid Empire, Multan and Kashmir are taken by the Palas as well. By 1100 CE, the empire also conquers southwards in Arakan up to the Yamam Delta. With the fall of Chalukyas in 1160 CE, coastal Konkan is subjugated by the empire. This establishes further connections with Malabar as well as with the Arab world in terms of maritime trade. With the decline and eventual fall of Cholas, the Pala Empire subjugate the coastal areas of Tamil Nadu, parts of Ceylon, as well as exert their influence on the Malacca region, slowly converting them into satellite states. With this, Pala Bengali culture starts making inroads into the southern Indian regions. This also establishes duality between the coastal and the heartland regions of South India, the heartland regions being under local chiefs, while the coastal regions being under the Pala Empire. Because of a strengthened Pala Empire in the North Indian regions, the Ghurids are not able to expand, so there is no establishment of Delhi Sultanate. But that doesn't mean Islam does not exist in India. It does come into India through contact with the Arabs, especially in the Arabian Sea coasts. But the expansion of Islam is much slower because one, there is no forced conversion, and two, the society is much more open and the caste system is almost non existent or very weak, and hence there is no resentment against the religions of Hinduism and Buddhism. And hence the phenomena we saw in our timeline where lower caste Hindus and Buddhists converted into Islam because they wanted to escape persecution does not happen here. In 1225 CE, the Mongol Empire rises and attacks the Ghurid Empire. Due to not having a safe haven in India, the Islamic empire of the Ghurids starts weakening and ultimately collapses. Then, when in the 1234 CE, the empire of Khwarizm is sacked, India sees an influx of Islamic refugees because they see Hindustan as the only place able to resist the Mongol onslaught. The Pala Empire, famous for its intellectual and religious tolerance, gives refuge to the Islamic refugees. When Baghdad is attacked, many scholars find refuge and patronage under the Palas. They also bring multiple works which were saved from the burning library of Baghdad to India. Culturally, around the mid 13th century, Bengali would replace Sanskrit as the prestige and governing language of the empire and slowly start spreading along with Bengali culture throughout the Pala domain. On the other hand, Islamic culture is also given a resort in India. The scholars fleeing Baghdad are patronized and housed in the Ujjain University, and hence Ujjain and multiple other universities like Prayag become synonymous with astronomical and theological research both in Indian as well as Islamic fields. India becomes the trade power of South Asia and the hub for learning and innovation. Within a couple of decades, the concept of caste system becomes very diluted, and caste merely becomes a way of grouping families together, and hence the caste barriers and barriers in taking up professions is broken, and hence the empire sees increased productivity and trade, and hence this ushers in the golden age throughout the Indian subcontinent, a second time under the Palas. But no administrative system and no empire can last forever. After 4 or 5 generations of good emperors, we could definitely see the Palas lose their stability. Because of the rule that the emperor should be selected from within the Pala family, we could see infighting in the family which would weaken and lead to the loss of good administrative capacities in the family as a whole. With growing instability, they would start losing domains, starting with Gujarat in the Konkan region, then the Coromandel coasts and Malacca. By the 15th century, the Pala would be limited to the North Indian regions and Bengal, and soon they would lose every territory except for the core of Bengal, Bihar, Purvanchal and Ayodhya. Many powers would be newly liberated during the fall of the Pala Empire, and after almost 4 centuries of centralized rule by the Pala Empire, India would see an immense power vacuum, with the liberated powers struggling for status as well as power. We could see the Mughals conquer into India from the north just as they did in our timeline, because I don't see any effect of the Palas surviving on the lineage of Mughals, and hence the Palas would fall and another empire would start rising in the lands of Indian subcontinent, albeit this time with foreign origins. The major difference though in this timeline will be that the political heart of India will revolve around Patliputra and Bengal, not Delhi as in our timeline, and hence it would take longer for the Mughals to establish an empire of India and call themselves Shahenshah-e-Hind. The Bengali language and culture would be the culture of the political elite and would be spread far and wide throughout the Indian subcontinent. We could see the Mughals eventually adopting the Bengali culture and bringing in Persian influence into it. A composite culture would develop between Bengali and Persian, just like it did between the Persian and Hindu cultures in our timeline. Another difference would be that in terms of trade and innovation, India would be placed in a much better position. Caste division would be weaker, the Indian society would be much more open and progressive and trade oriented. And without the ban on overseas travel, we could see the Mughals recolonize the Malaccas region because the trade oriented people of India would see that as their core. Whether or not India in this timeline would be colonized by the Europeans is hard to tell, but India would surely remain the intellectual trade and economic powerhouse of South Asia for centuries more. And that is where I'll end the video. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Don't forget to like and share to support this growing empire of ours and subscribe to join its administrative ranks.